Welcome to the Disruptive Social Care Podcast with social care provocateur and social media queen Shirley Ayres and myself, Stuart Arnott, founder of Mindings, a service dedicated to bringing social media to the disconnected. In this fortnightly show, we aim to spread the word about what's going on in the world of disruptive social care, amplify the voices of people with great ideas that few people have ever heard about, and to help our communities connect and collaborate. Well, Shirley, hello.
Hi, Stuart.
Show number 2.
Yes.
And some nice feedback we had from show number 1, including a 5-star review on iTunes.
This is true. Well, people certainly like the format. I've been told it's newsy, informative, and definitely worth listening to. And a request that we start doing a weekly podcast because there is so much happening in social care. So if there are any potential sponsors out there, we would love to hear from you.
We certainly would. We've already been described as a Chris Evans and Moira Stewart of social care. I'm happy to go with that. Any sponsors, give us a shout. So, Shirley, what's been happening this week in the world of social care?
Oh, still very, very busy. This week I was reading Redesigning the Front End of Social Care, which is a challenging new paper which focuses on the very real problem of how people access social care information and support. Very strong message about the need to totally redesign the whole system and actively encourage the involvement of service users and carers if we're going to create services that are fit for the 21st century. And a special mention for the Digital Health and Care Conference and Hackday held in Leeds last week, which had a very lively discussion amongst health and care professionals about how to encourage innovation in public services, and a demonstration about how to develop an app. And I think it was about 8 hours. The winner of the Hackday was GP Hop, a simple and time-saving app which would make it easy for parents to review and move doctors. Urgently needed. And
that was Claire O.T., wasn't it?
That was indeed. And she, in fact, is one of my Follow Fridays this week, the founder of the conference, which one of the most important things about it was that it was bringing together health and social care professionals, talking together. You know, if we're going to make integrated care a reality, then we've got to start breaking down the silo thinking. And just sort of breaking down the silo thinking again, I also attended the Law and Technology Conference, where there were many lessons for social care. And I learned about the concept of irrational rejectionism, which is how Richard Susskind describes the reactions of many lawyers to adopting new and enabling technologies, which I think is equally applicable to the care sector.
I love that term, irrational rejectionism.
No, yes.
Great stuff. Well, certainly make sure we put links to all these in the show notes. I found a video actually of Claire O.T. talking about GP Hops, so that's already in the show notes.
Great. And what about you, Stuart? Now, you mentioned before that you were actually getting the Mindings website launched. How are you doing?
Well, yes, kind of. We got everything up on Thursday afternoon. Then on Friday morning, realised that we hadn't actually linked the Mindings homepage to the back end where you could actually set up an account. Dull. But on Friday morning we fixed it and the Minding website is now totally live, so I invite listeners to go to mindings.com, have a read of what Mindings is all about and give it a whirl with a month free trial. Helen Keegan is a retail and marketing communications professional with over 20 years experience, specialising in mobile for 12 years, which is an age in mobile. Helen specialises in mobile marketing, analysing trends and creating products and services for clients such as the BBC, News Corp, DMGT, the English National Opera and Vodafone. Helen's a very familiar face on the conference circuit at home and abroad, and she's been running mobile networking events since 2001, including Swedish Beers, the Heroes of the Mobile Screen Conference, and most recently, the Heroes of the Mobile Fringe Festival in Barcelona. A collection of 45 events in the last week of February, celebrating all things mobile. She blogs about mobile marketing at technokitten.com and is a prodigious tweeter at technokitten. Helen, I can't not ask. Technokitten. Explain, please.
Well, it's a bit of a fluke, really. What happened was my background is actually fashion retail when I first started working. And when Sunday trading came in, that was a really naff idea as a store manager. So I quit, not really knowing what I was going to do next. I retrained, ended up working as a marketing assistant for Intercontinental Hotels and Resorts. And a friend of mine who'd known me for some years at that point met me after work one day, and I was beavering away with my Harvard graphics at my Windows DOS computer, and he said I'd turned into a right techno kitten. And that was in 1994, and the name stuck.
Oh, that's fantastic. This is the Disruptive Social Care Podcast. How do you define disruption? Because the name has raised some eyebrows.
Yes.
And what do you think that disruptive technology, specifically mobile and social media, can contribute to social care?
Yes, well, I'm going to throw the question back at you. Why did you call it the Disruptive Social Care Podcast? What does it mean to you?
Well, part of the mission of the show is to discover exactly what that means.
It is indeed, yes. I mean, the reality is that the sector needs a big shake-up, and that's going to require disruption. And the other reality is that a lot of small companies disrupt through innovation. So I think we're trying to make connections between what needs to change and helping people on the journey.
Well, there's certainly a lot of innovation happening that I see within the mobile sector, and some of that is in what could be applied to social care or making things more accessible to a wider range of the population, just because of the way that the service is operated on a mobile device or a tablet device, whatever that might be. So that's disruptive in itself. And I think the other disruptive thing that mobile technology can bring is bringing the cost down. The cost to build an Apple service today is peanuts compared with what it was when I was doing a mobile startup back in 2000. There's just no comparison in costs. Now, that's not to say it's free or really cheap necessarily, because you still have Marcom's costs and people costs and other resources.
Sure.
But the actual software and the actual kit you need has dramatically reduced in price, and that's disruptive in itself. And I think when larger organisations wake up and start to understand how they can harness this grassroots talent and this grassroots community without being scared, and because it does mean releasing some control, if not a lot of control of what they already do, then I think some really exciting things can happen.
And certainly one of the things that we see is within organisations, people finding little backdoor routes to do things, be it starting up their own little Twitter account or, using mobile in an interesting way. And we believe that this is something that people should embrace and roll out.
It's interesting, actually. I think there are two issues there. One is about accessibility generally, and I think that we're all still grappling with that. And I think the issue about the public sector and losing control or actually trusting their staff is something that a lot of people are still getting their minds around.
Absolutely. I mean, my own experience of dealing with public services generally is there's a mix of truly talented and energetic people,
yes,
and the job's worths.
Yes.
And seemingly as an outsider and kind of as a consumer, if you like, not a lot in between. And certainly friends of mine who've worked in public sector have had frustrations in management roles because of the job's worth attitude or just kind of no communication, and it's there's a lack of teamwork and collaboration because culturally that has never had to exist. It's just a question of go in, do your job, go home again. And I think in this 24/7 connected world, that's no longer the case and makes things a little bit tougher.
A lot of innovation comes from personal experience. I speak for myself here, with having to address accessibility or disability issues. Has it affected the way that you recommend that people market their mobile products and services?
Yes. Now, a year ago, I knew nothing at all about this sector. Now, I've worked in Marcoms for a long time, for 20 years or so, and in mobile for 12. So you'd think that I might have come across this, but I was a complete novice, and for it not to come on my radar at all when I feel pretty connected with the wider world is really troubling,
yes,
and actually very worrying, because it means it's operating in a silo and like a weird niche silo. So the only reason it came to my attention was because I ended up working on a project with Vodafone to help set up and manage their Vodafone Smart Accessibility Awards in the UK, just looking after the UK arm of it. And so it was a learning curve for me to understand what accessibility actually is and how that's treated in the mobile sector and what that means to the developer community, which is who Vodafone was trying to reach last year, and they're rerunning the awards this year as well. And in the developer community, there's just nothing out there. It's so complicated already to develop a mobile app in many respects. Fair enough, you can develop an iPhone app, but you've also got Android and you've got BlackBerry and you've got Barda and you've got HTML5 and you've got, hundreds of thousands of different devices, different screen sizes, different memory capacity. You're working with different network operators with different bandwidths and data connectivity. There's a whole bunch of things that make building an app quite complicated in terms of the design process and the planning process. To add in thinking about customers and real people, which isn't often at the forefront of a developer's mind necessarily, because it...
Surely.
Well, developers tend to build for themselves, and often there are hobbyist developers who make good and who came up with a cracking idea because it was something they needed and their friends really liked, and it developed from there. Some people are just practicing their skills just to see what they can create. Others don't get out that much. I mean, it's not necessarily their fault, but if you're kind of really locked into the computer world and you're at your computer 16 hours a day, your experience of real people is through a computer screen rather than working in a shop where you have to deal with people face to face. So inevitably, there are some gaps in that learning. But also then when you have to add in thinking about customers, thinking about their needs, and then, oh my goodness, what if they can't hear so well? What if their eyesight isn't so great? What if they've broken their right arm and they can't use a touch screen? What if they had a stroke and they're mentally impaired for a period of time? This just isn't on the radar of a healthy, fit 20-something-year-old computer developer on the whole. I'm not saying it's all like that, but it's not front of mind. And to get a developer looking at different platforms is quite challenging, and that's some of the work that I do, working with the likes of Vodafone and some of the handset manufacturers. So instead of it being, developed for iPhone, not Android, it's actually a question of developing, but in what order? And that's about understanding your customer and your business models. And then having to get those developers to think about, if I have to develop with, eyesight in mind or hearing or something else, and it's something I know nothing about and have no personal direct experience about, it's a major challenge. And there aren't any simple tricks and tools and things out there. I mean, where do you start? And that's certainly kind of the biggest takeaway, I guess, from working on the project with Vodafone last year, is that this is an unknown quantity. I ran a series of workshops as part of that project around the country, and it was great, had some great speakers, some great information was shared, but it was in a bit of an echo chamber largely, because the kind of the normal developers who develop with kind of fully able customers in mind, it's just not on their radar in the same way it was never on my radar. So it's still a challenge.
But also there's, even if for nothing else, accessibility aside, there's a business case. There, according to Gurdon's statistics, 21.6 million people in the UK over 50, and I know we could further break that down. They have a collective pot of £175 billion of disposable income, 80% of the UK's private wealth. According to a Saga magazine survey, 18% of them love buying new gadgets, 44% are prepared to pay more for products that make life easier, and 10% of the UK have some kind of disability. So I always flippantly say, why are mobiles, tablets and other technology being sold to kids who have fickle taste and no money? And because of nothing else, there's a huge market being ignored.
Yes, I agree with you that there is a huge market. I think there's a massive opportunity. It's always surprised me that adverts aren't subtitled on telly, or only a few are subtitled on telly. Both my parents are hard of hearing and use subtitles the whole time, and that's just an obvious one for me. But when you're looking at the whole kind of marketing of tablets and of mobile phones and other devices and software and services and what have you, actually I disagree. I don't think they are marketed at children or people without the money. The challenge is when you're looking at how these devices are marketed, it tends to be on TV, it tends to be mass market, and they have to take the kind of the biggest chunk of market where it looks cool. And it's hard to make something look cool on TV unless that's associated with youth. And that's a cultural thing, not just in this country, but but in other countries as well. Youth is always equated with cool, and music sells gadgets, sex sells gadgets, youth sells gadgets, and that's why. And it's very difficult to change that. But I do see that devices are being marketed at different sectors. There's been a real backlash against pinking things up, so making something pink so that women will buy the gadget, and that's a good thing because it's making marketeers in the sector think a bit more carefully about how they segment their marketplace. But there's still a long way to go. And it's a very complicated market. There are so many devices out there. There are so many different price plans. There's so many unknown quantities that if you're not clued up when it comes to technology, it's all a bit of a minefield. And you go to your local car phone warehouse or Phones for You shop or Currys or whatever, you're confronted again with a 20-something sales assistant who needs to sell X amount. They're not going to have the widest knowledge available, and they're just going to pick on one or two things that they like, which they're not you. So it's difficult for them to make the right recommendations.
Well, certainly as the father of a 4-year-old girl, I despair at the pinkification of the world.
Can I just say, if that ridiculous Shreddies knitting advert on the telly is any reflection of how young marketers see older people, yes, we have very big problems.
Yes.
I was discussing this with my daughter last weekend. It makes me furious. Stupid ad.
It is stupid. I mean, my parents are elderly, and my mum doesn't like old people because they're portrayed in that way.
Yeah.
She still feels very young at heart, and she wouldn't want to be associated with that. So I agree.
We're going to have an experiment with subtitling the programme, so look out for that. We might not make it for this Friday's programme. We're certainly planning on doing that in the future. Helen kindly suggested a tool that we can use to do that, so we're going to give that a try. Aside from marketing, thought even just down to the nuts and bolts of the actual making of the apps, in terms of what we call UX design, the user experience design, I've been to specialist conferences, marketing to in inverted commas, seniors, and a lot of that doesn't seem to go beyond big text on apps or big buttons on devices. And this is companies who speak a good game, but again, it turns out the devices just have big buttons, and that's not an accessibility issue. Surely that's just basic user experience. And
Exactly. I mean, the thing is, when you design with the examples that you're talking about, the big button devices, usually they're a bit overpriced because it's a smaller market, so their production costs are that much higher. But they're also a bit patronising, and they're not very cool, and they're not very sexy. And just because my eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, it's actually relatively straightforward, or should be, to increase the font size on a phone. I shouldn't have to put on my reading glasses to look at my phone, not these days. And that just helps everybody. And if you think about good design and good usability, something that works for an older person who hasn't quite got the dexterity in their hands that they used to have, then that just makes it easier for everyone. And that's why I like things, the thinking behind things like Threedom Phone from Rebo, where they've actually thought about how to make a really good user experience on an Android device that, yes, it has people in mind who are a little bit older or want something a bit simpler, but still want the capability and the sexiness of a shiny new device that looks like the same as everyone else's. And so many of the devices for older people, I say that, older people, there's such a wide variety of older people, including my sister and my brother, who I don't think are old, but, the demographics would say they're older. A lot of them are medicalised and frumpy and grey and serious and worthy, and that's just not very exciting. And it singles people out as special needs. And even if you have special needs, you don't want to be labelled special needs. It's quite a negative connotation. And that's why I'm excited to see apps and services out there on mobile that can be used by anybody, but they're also inclusive of other people who might have some kind of disability or impairment, maybe, dyslexia. So I found out last year that dyslexics find italics really hard to read. Now, I never knew that. So that's informed my thinking just with writing my own blog posts. And, when I see apps, there's so much that could be done with text to make that easier for people with reduced eyesight. Even for me, I've got, minor lenses in for reading, but it would just make my life easier and it make a lot of other people's life easier, and for dyslexics and whatever else. And so when you hear about really cool things like the Papa Sangre game that Jonathan Hassel introduced me to last year, which is an audio game for everybody to enjoy. It's a really scary mobile game, but, it's particularly good for blind people. And then yesterday when I was asking friends on Twitter and Facebook if there were any apps and services that they liked or could recommend for people with any kind of impairment, one of my friends, she tweeted me back, said, well, I've seen, it's not quite what you're looking for, Helen, but I saw this article about Hailocab. And actually, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm looking for. It's an app that everybody uses, but it made someone's life who's in a wheelchair day in, day out, it made their life easier because they could hail a cab from the comfort of their wheelchair without having to be awkward and uncomfortable on the corner of a London street trying to flag down a cab that would never see them ordinarily. I think that's genius.
Absolutely. The Hailocab app is brilliant. It's brilliant in reading a post about how simple it is to use. Absolutely amazing. And also the Threedom
That's right,
interface.
Yep.
I mean, it's a sexy interface.
It is.
They've managed to combine simplicity with really clever design. So we'll put links to that on the show notes as well.
Can I also put in a plug for Enabled by Design? And that's a community of people with disabilities who are passionate about promoting new design. And they have a lot of really interesting products on their website. And they invite people to vote on them, to comment on them. So we'll put a link into Enabled by as well.
Absolutely.
There's also an exciting thing I've been invited to next week, which I got yesterday. So I've been invited to a product launch next week at Dans le Noir, which is a restaurant, and there's one in London, there's one in Paris and some other cities, that's completely in the dark. So the staff are blind and
Yes.
you're completely immersed in their experience, and you have a meal in the dark. So the reason is there's a product launch and I know very little about it, except that there's some kind of new phone or device built by and founded by blind people for blind people. So I'll be able to report back on that once I've done the event.
Oh, yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they're disrupting screen reader technology from what I understand, but I don't have the detail yet, so on tenterhooks for that one.
Excellent. One of my bugbears, user interfaces, really intuitive ones. People immediately think of Apple, for example, and they're very heavily patented and trademarked. Now, that means that other developers have to do something different. Now, in some ways, that means that they're potentially doing something less good. Not necessarily, but clearly Apple have poured millions into this is the optimum design. And so therefore, anybody doing anything else is potentially doing something less intuitive, with using unfamiliar icons and menus and basically constantly reinventing the wheel. And the thought was, couldn't the developer community and accessibility groups not get together, create some standards like a sign language and open source them?
Absolutely. I mean, this issue came up at the Edinburgh workshop I ran last year, specifically around sign language icons for use in kind of autistic apps and for people who can't read words. And apparently the kind of official set are locked down and you can't just use them free of charge and what have you. So I agree there's a need to open source this stuff. But it goes back to the communication and getting the different groups of people together so that we start to hear about these issues and needs to create the solutions. And in the same way that over the last 10 years, there's been a big gap between the web and mobile communities, the web developer and mobile developer communities. It's only now they're beginning to come together and cross over. But, you know, they're different mindsets, different cultures, different backgrounds. And yes, obviously there's some crossover, but it is different. And in the same way, we have to get the two communities together. Well, it's more than two communities together.
There is a fabulous publication called Disability Horizons, which is online, and run by a guy called Martin Sibley. And it is worthwhile following his adventures in a wheelchair because it is such a positive take on what people can do who have disabilities.
Excellent. Well, we better move on with the show, but thanks for that, Helen. That was some very interesting points there raised. Please come into the website at disruptivesocialcare.com or onto our Facebook page at facebook.com/disruptivesocialcare and leave some comments. I think one of the main things that we're taking away from the interview is, as well as innovating, we need to be collaborating. Will you hang around and chip in the rest of the programme?
Of course.
This section of the programme is called Follow Friday because it's Friday. Well, it's not really, it's Wednesday, but the show goes out on Friday. But also, the reason we call it that is because people who use Twitter use hashtag FF for Follow Friday to recommend people to their community. So Shirley, in last week's show, we said we'd talk more about hashtags. So what is a hashtag?
A hashtag is a way of uniting tweets around a particular topic or keyword. A hashtag is a great way to increase your tweet visibility, but they should actually only be used if the tweet adds value to the topic.
If the twit adds value to the
Well, there's a lot of puns on tweeters, Twitter, twits. Who uses Twitter anyway? It's quite democratic. Any Twitter user can categorise or follow topics with hashtags, and they can become very popular and trend on Twitter, and that is where you're likely to attract a lot of interest from mainstream media. Some useful sites to find out a bit more about hashtags. Hashtags.org, first place to find the most recent and hot hashtags. And another one, whichtag.com. God knows, I can't pronounce that. We'll put it on the website. WTHASHTAG. Yes. WT hashtag.com. All right then. Anyway, thank you, Stuart. It's a user-generated wiki of hashtags. If you don't know what any hashtag means or how to use it. And hashtags are increasingly used to promote and live blog at events or Twitter chats, which makes following an event or a discussion on Twitter so much easier. We mentioned the hashtag Follow Friday last time, which in fact users on Twitter created as a shorthand for Follow Friday. And that is a lovely recommendation, a lovely tradition, and great for building up a list of good people to follow.
Now, we have a hashtag. What is it? And when should people use it?
Well, we use DEUK Care, which is short for Digital Engagement in UK Care. And we use it obviously to promote the podcast, but it's great if you want to share any innovations on Twitter, which are using technology and social media for social care. So if someone wants to talk to us on Twitter, hashtag it DEUK Care, and we can pick it up very easily.
Excellent. And who do you recommend that we should be following?
Well, I follow quite a lot of people, so it's going to be a challenge picking out the hot tips for this week. But I would first of all recommend Ermintrude 2, who is one of the most insightful and challenging social work bloggers and tweeters, who uses social media very effectively and is a contributor to the Connecting Social Care and Social Media blog. And I'd recommend Who's Shoes, who is passionate about personalisation in health and social care, the importance of integration, and the creator of Who's Shoes. And she has been curating a brilliant series of blog posts about living with dementia. And also, possibly worth minding that you've been featured.
I did. Hello there to Jill. She asked me to do a little guest post for her for this series. So I gave a little bit of background about mindings. Because there was actually a thread that we don't normally talk about, but also my wife's grandmother developed Alzheimer's. And so part of how mindings came about was through the learnings we had through that. So I tell that story. If you go to nutshellcommons.co.uk, follow Who's Shoes.
Yes, definitely worth reading. And as mentioned earlier, Claire O.T., founder of the very innovative digital health conference and Hackday, and Sui 2Y, an inspirational disability rights campaigner who spoke last Saturday so passionately about the power of social media to influence government and public thinking about welfare reform. And finally for this week, someone who I met and talked to at the Law Tech camp conference on Friday, Paul Burnell UK, who writes about privacy, autonomy and human rights, particularly on the internet. And he's written a very good prezi. In fact, it just came on this week on his website about the issues around privacy and sharing information on the internet.
And we'll put all these links on the show notes, which is at disruptivesocialcare.com. Helen, do you have any tips of anybody we should keep an eye on at the moment?
Yes, I think we should be keeping an eye on Bard Owl. So that's run by Bookmeister, Chris Book, and Bard Owl is a subscription service for business audiobooks. And it's been designed, again, with visually impaired people in mind. They've still got a long way to go, but it is top of mind for them that this is a service for anyone who wants to listen to business books in audio format, but they have thought about the kind of accessibility part of it as well. And the other one would be Ribot, R-I-B-O-T. They're the team behind Threedom Phone, and their tips and hints on design work and their thinking behind Threedom Phone are really interesting.
Rebo guys are great. I had the pleasure of presenting at a conference with them last year. Fantastic product they've got. And also the Bard Owl app. I've heard it described as the Spotify for books.
Yes, that sounds about right. Yep.
So it's a great model. Yeah. And as speaking to Chris the other day, absolutely designed with accessibility in mind. Well, we'll put all these ideas and other information about things we've been talking about in the show notes, as I've said, at disruptivesocialcare.com. And I'll keep plugging our Facebook page at facebook.com/disruptivesocialcare. Come and like us and follow us and interact with us. And you can follow me at MindingsStew.
And you can follow me at Shirley Ayres.
And you can follow me at TechnoKitten.
And if you do tweet about the show, remember to use that hashtag DEUKCare, because of course now you know what a hashtag is. So Shirley, what do we have coming up in the next coming fortnight?
My thoughts about the challenges of disrupting social care. To be transformative, social must be a strategy that is integrated into business processes across organisations. And Helen mentioned about the silo thinking, and that is a particular issue for health and social care, which is why I'm now providing one-to-one mentoring for chief executives, because inspired leadership is essential. My belief is that every chief executive should be setting the example by tweeting themselves and being much more engaged with social media. That it's also really important to involve frontline staff, service users and carers in developing digital solutions and promoting social innovation. An idea doesn't care who has it. And the use of social media is only helpful if it's used for genuine listening and interaction. Still, too many organisations are using social media to broadcast rather than engage. And after a while, it gets boring. How many press releases do I want to read? I want to hear what the stories are behind what is happening in organisations in terms of innovation. So, my favourite quote of the week from Twitter. It's time to stop consulting and start listening. But moving from a vision and values to new behaviours and actions is complex, and it's a very, very big learning curve. So we have a lot of excitement being generated in the care sector by the potential launch of the white paper on health and social care reform. Still no date, but interestingly, the King's Fund are bringing together key policy designers and decision makers to discuss the implications of social care reform and to explore the future. And it's going to provide an opportunity to reflect on social care reforms and hear case studies about innovation. And the conference includes a session about how social media can help us deliver better care. That's taking place on the 18th of July, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting. On a different note, it's important that we help young people feel comfortable using the internet, and I'm looking forward to attending a free event for teachers, practitioners working with young people and careers advisors, which is exploring how to engage young people through the internet, how to keep young people safe, and the implications of using social media. And that's taking place on the 12th of July in London. So, 2 interesting events coming up. And I think while mentioning keeping young people safe on the internet, I would like to put a plug in for the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, who've got some very, very good guidance and allows young people to report inappropriate behaviour by adults, and another website called ChildNet.
Good stuff. CEOs tweeting. Wonder if we'll see that happen. Well, if Rupert Murdoch can be persuaded to tweet, be a bit less
Yes.
controversial, and maybe if some of the senior staff at Barclays Bank were to tweet and interact with some real people, they wouldn't be in as much trouble. That's probably Barclays Bank not going to sponsoring us now.
I'm not sure they would be good for our brand image, Stuart, if I may say.
I heard somebody say this week that the most interesting things that they learn at conferences are in the corridors during the breaks. And I was thinking of you, saying that you follow sometimes multiple conferences on Twitter, which is a bit like listening in on the corridor conversations, I thought. So if you can't go to these conferences, Twitter is not only a good place to listen, but to participate. So remember to check the show notes on the website. We'll put all of the links of, I think, everything that was spoken about in the show today, disruptivesocialcare.com, for all the details and links. And, of course, links on how to subscribe to the show on iTunes and on YouTube, and buttons there to help you share it with your Facebook and Twitter friends. And we have some fantastic interviews lined up for the coming weeks. I saw on your notes, Shirley. I'm very excited about that.
Yes, and we're getting more and more people who are keen to come on and discuss disruptive social care with us, which I think is really encouraging.
Excellent. And we're not only going to be doing some studio-based shows, but we're even going to be looking at doing some things on Skype and Google Hangouts. So we'll be using some interesting technologies ourselves to do that.
Well, that's it from us this week. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please help us spread the word.
Come visit us at disruptivesocialcare.com and on our Facebook page at facebook.com/disruptivesocialcare. And a special thanks again to Helen Keegan, our special guest this week.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll look forward to seeing, hearing, interacting with you in a couple of weeks.